Gemini is often misunderstood because people tend to associate silence with emptiness, distraction, or lack of interest. But if you are a Gemini, you know this isn't true at all. Your silence is never empty. It is full of thoughts, connections, memories, and observations that are quietly forming inside your mind. While others speak to fill the space, you observe. While others rush to conclusions, you slow down and watch. And this is not accidental, it is instinctive. From a very early age, Gemini learns that people reveal much more when they feel comfortable, when they believe they are not being analyzed. So instead of interrupting, correcting, or confronting too soon, Gemini chooses to listen. And while listening, Gemini is doing something most people don't even realize is happening: connecting patterns. You are not only hearing what is being said, but also noticing what is avoided, what is repeated, what changes slightly every time the story is told. You notice tone shifts, body language, hesitation, and contradictions that others miss because they are too focused on responding instead of understanding. This is why Gemini often feels mentally ahead of conversations. While someone is still explaining themselves, Gemini already knows where the explanation is going. Not because Gemini assumes, but because the mind is processing multiple layers at once. Words are only one layer. Behavior is another. Energy is another. Consistency over time is another. Gemini naturally sees the full picture forming long before it is obvious to everyone else. And yet, even with this awareness, Gemini stays quiet. Not because there is nothing to say, but because speaking too soon would interrupt the process. Silence becomes a tool, a test, a space where truth can reveal itself without pressure. Gemini understands that when people are challenged immediately, they become defensive, guarded, and performative. But when they are allowed to speak freely, they expose themselves without realizing it. So Gemini waits, and during this waiting, an internal dialogue unfolds. A constant, subtle questioning. Am I being fair? Is this a moment or a pattern? Is this misunderstanding or intentional behavior? Gemini questions their own perceptions before questioning anyone else. This self-awareness is crucial. Gemini does not want to accuse without certainty. Words matter too much for that. Once spoken, they cannot be taken back, and Gemini understands the weight of language better than most signs. This is why Gemini's silence is often misinterpreted as indecision or emotional distance. In reality, it is discernment. Gemini is filtering emotion from truth. They are separating feeling from fact. They are making sure that when they finally speak, their words are aligned with clarity, not impulse. What makes this process difficult is that Gemini often knows the truth before others are ready to accept it. This creates an internal tension. You see the direction things are heading, but you're surrounded by people who are still emotionally attached to illusions. So you stay quiet, you observe, you wait, and in that waiting, you begin to detach. Not emotionally at first, but mentally. You prepare yourself for the possibility that what you already see will eventually need to be acknowledged. There is a loneliness in this awareness. Gemini often feels like the only one in the room who sees what is actually happening beneath the surface. You may laugh, engage, and participate, but internally there is a growing distance. Not because you stopped caring, but because clarity changes how you relate to people. Once you see someone clearly, you cannot unsee them. This is also why Gemini values reactions more than promises. Promises are easy to make. Words can be rehearsed. But reactions are raw. Gemini watches how people respond when they are questioned, when boundaries are set, when things don't go their way. These moments reveal character far more than carefully chosen sentences ever could. And Gemini remembers these reactions, storing them quietly, adding them to the larger picture. As time goes on, something subtle shifts. Gemini speaks less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are listening more carefully. They become more selective with their energy, more cautious with their trust. Silence deepens, and so does understanding. People around Gemini may start to feel uneasy, sensing that something has changed. Silence, when paired with awareness, is powerful. It creates space for reflection, and not everyone is comfortable being reflected back to themselves. And still, Gemini does not rush, because Gemini knows that truth spoken at the wrong time is often rejected, no matter how accurate it is. So timing becomes just as important as insight. Gemini waits for the moment when reality can no longer be denied, when patterns are undeniable, when silence has done its work. If you are a Gemini watching this, ask yourself honestly, how many times have you known the truth long before you spoke it? How many times have you stayed quiet, observing, letting people reveal themselves, even when part of you wanted to speak immediately? And how many times did silence prove that your instincts were right all along? Your silence is not weakness. It is intelligence in motion. It is perception refining itself. It is understanding forming beneath the surface. And this is only the beginning, because when Gemini finally speaks the truth, it is never impulsive, never careless, and never meaningless. It comes after silence has already confirmed everything. When Gemini finally speaks, it often surprises everyone, not because the words are aggressive or dramatic, but because they are precise. By the time Gemini decides to break the silence, there is no confusion left inside. Doubt has already been examined, questioned, and dissolved. What remains is clarity. And clarity, when spoken calmly, can be more unsettling than anger. People often expect confrontation to come with emotion, raised voices, or visible frustration. But Gemini rarely delivers truth that way. Instead, the words come quietly, almost casually, which makes them even harder to dismiss. There is no emotional chaos to blame, no impulsive reaction to invalidate, just observation turned into language, and once that happens, the dynamic shifts permanently. This is why Gemini's words feel final. Not because Gemini wants to dominate the conversation, but because there is nothing left to debate. Everything has already been considered, every angle explored, every excuse heard internally before it was spoken out loud. When Gemini finally speaks, it is usually after realizing that silence has done all it can do. What people don't see is how heavy that decision is. Gemini doesn't enjoy speaking uncomfortable truths. Despite the stereotype of being emotionally detached, Gemini feels deeply, but feelings do not control their mouth. Responsibility does. Gemini understands that words have consequences, and once spoken, relationships change. So they wait until they are ready for whatever comes next, even if that means losing people. Often, when Gemini speaks the truth, others react defensively. They may say things like, "Why didn't you say this before?" or "You never mentioned that bothered you." And Gemini hears this with a strange calm because they know the answer. They stayed silent because they were listening, because they were giving space, because they were hoping behavior would change on its own without the need for confrontation. This is one of Gemini's internal conflicts. They believe in growth, adaptability, and self-awareness. They want people to see themselves without being forced. But when that doesn't happen, silence eventually turns into distance. And distance eventually demands honesty. If you're a Gemini, you've probably experienced this moment many times, the moment where you realize that staying quiet is no longer protecting your peace, but costing it. That's when the shift happens. Not emotionally explosive, but mentally decisive. You stop questioning yourself. You stop wondering if you're imagining things. You accept what you see. And once Gemini accepts the truth internally, speaking it becomes inevitable. What follows can be uncomfortable. Some people feel exposed, others feel misunderstood. Some try to rewrite the past or minimize patterns Gemini clearly remembers. But Gemini doesn't argue at this stage. They don't chase validation. They simply state what they've observed and how it made them feel, calmly, clearly, without exaggeration. This is where Gemini's intelligence becomes unmistakable. Not the kind of intelligence that shows off, but the kind that sees through emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and inconsistency. Gemini doesn't need to raise their voice to be heard. Their calmness alone communicates certainty. After this moment, Gemini often changes, not dramatically but subtly. They become more selective, more guarded with access to their inner world. Silence returns, but it's different now. It's not observational silence anymore. It's boundary silence, the kind that protects rather than analyzes. This is also why people often say Gemini feels distant after speaking the truth. In reality, Gemini has simply adjusted their expectations. They are no longer confused about who someone is. And once Gemini understands someone clearly, they interact with them accordingly. No illusions, no false hope, just reality. There is a quiet strength in this. Gemini doesn't seek revenge. They don't dwell endlessly on disappointment. They move forward mentally, even if emotionally it takes time. Their adaptability allows them to reorganize their inner world quickly once clarity is reached. That's how Gemini survives emotional complexity without losing themselves. But this process isn't painless. Gemini often carries the weight of knowing things before others are ready to face them. They carry conversations that never happened, boundaries that were never respected, and truths that stayed unspoken for too long. This can create emotional fatigue. That's why Gemini needs mental stimulation, honest communication, and environments where truth isn't punished. If you're a Gemini watching this, it's important to ask yourself something honestly. Are you using silence to observe, or are you using it to avoid expressing needs? There is a difference. Silence is powerful when it leads to clarity, but it becomes harmful when it leads to self-abandonment. Gemini must remember that speaking earlier doesn't always mean speaking impulsively. Sometimes it simply means honoring your perception before resentment builds. Growth for Gemini comes from balance, knowing when to observe and when to speak, knowing that not everyone deserves unlimited access to your mind, and understanding that your perception is valid even when others don't immediately understand it. Your gift is your mind. Your ability to see layers, patterns, and truths beneath the surface, but that gift must be protected, not overextended. You don't owe everyone silence, and you don't owe everyone explanations. When Gemini learns to trust their clarity and speak with intention rather than exhaustion, something powerful happens. Relationships become more honest, boundaries become clearer, and silence regains its original purpose, awareness, not suppression. So, if you've been quiet lately, ask yourself why. Are you still observing, or have you already seen enough? Because once Gemini has seen enough, silence is no longer necessary. And when you do speak, let it come from clarity, not frustration. Let it be calm, grounded, and unapologetically true. That is where your power truly lies. And if this video resonated with you, if you felt seen or understood in ways you rarely do, don't forget to support the channel. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and let others know they're not alone in how deeply they perceive the world. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos like this. Your mind is not too much. Your silence is not emptiness, and your truth, when spoken, matters.